Thanks for joining us. This is the second show and tell of our IMS Alpha. We'll get started with, if I can click on the right bits of my screen. This is what we're going to be doing today. We'll try and stay to those times, about 45 minutes rather than the full hour. We are recording the session, so if you do need to duck out, please do. Otherwise, we'll share this afterwards on with our blog and comms. What we're going to do today, most of the focus today is going to be looking at the proposition that we've put together and where we've got to with the project. So we'll have a quick 5-minute intro and recap from me, and then over to Saul to describe that proposition, and then over to everybody to hopefully feedback on it, contribute and tell us what you think of it. So pay attention, there will be a test. And then we'll have 5 minutes just looking at what next for sprint 3. And then there are 4 sprints in this project in total. So this is the second of 4 show and tells. So very quick recap. We are still working with Dorset, Huntingdonshire and DXW. We haven't fallen out yet, so that's a good start. We're all still friends. We've got quite a big team. There's 15 of us working in the team. We've had some leavers and new starters. We've gone through that, but we are a team of 15, and we've got it's quite multidisciplinary in that each council's contributing to the different roles, and it's a fantastic way to work, to be honest. This is what we need to get done over the course of the project, or the course of the phase, I should say. Everything in the alpha, so mapping the landscape and the wider ecosystem of what an income management system needs to connect with and contact, and the sort of wider context that it plays a part in. We need to prototype new features of the new system that we're working towards. So from the discovery, we discovered that there were 4 things councils needed the system to do that it didn't for Barnsley. So we're putting together prototypes of how those features might work. We are designing the first iteration of a support model and proposition, and that's what we're going to talk through today. Creating council personas for future users, so we know what types of different councils are out there. So some councils will have very strong technical capability, and they might be interested in taking the software and running it for themselves. Others will want to buy the thing and get support from a third party. So there are different types of councils who might be interested in the product. We need to create a cost model, so we know how we can price the thing up and make it available. We need to define an approach to service governance, so that's around looking at how we manage changes to the core product and how we make sure that council needs are being fed into it at all times, so that it's meeting those needs and not going off at a tangent. And we need to define a reference architecture and infrastructure for the system. So if we're going to make it available to everybody, how do we actually do it? So that's things like looking at SaaS, at open source Git repositories, and all the different elements around that. So there's some quite meaty things in there that are going to take a lot of digging into. During sprint 1, those are the ones that we tackled. There wasn't too much work on the prototypes. We discussed the outline of what they needed to be, and done some sort of crazy 8 diagrams around them, but quite light touch during sprint 1. During sprint 2, we got into a little more detail with those, and during sprint 3, we'll go on to those further. But the prototypes and the design of them, the outline of them, feeds into the proposition that we're going to talk through in a minute. And then we continue with the reference architecture and infrastructure, which is now starting to come towards a final position. So the proposition, presentation and discussion. Saul is going to take us through that. Do you want to steal the screen, Saul?
See if I can. Which of my windows am I sharing? That one there. Let's see. Can everybody see that screen?
Yep.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Fantastic. I've got to remember to look at the camera, which is up there, not the screen without down there. Maybe I should just move it. I've heard of people putting googly eyes on their camera, so they're pointing in the right direction. I think that's a great idea. Okay, so as Richard said, that we've
that's gone off your screen, so.
Oh, has it?
We can see your wallpaper now.
Fantastic. I'll leave that down there, then I won't. Then I'll just have to disregard. As Richard mentioned, we wanted to use the show and tell to try and get some feedback on what we think the new IMS looks like. So what it is. We spent quite a lot of time during this sprint honing down on that. During the first sprint, there was a lot of yes, but what is it? During this sprint, we've really come to try and define that quite definitively, quite a lot of thought gone into how it is. So I wanted to take you through it and then get your feedback on it. So let's see, click forward. So to start with, defining what an income management system is, because it's many things to many people, but in essence, we think it's a mechanism to allow you to keep track of the money in your bank account and what it was paid in there for. So it's like the modern day equivalent of balancing your checkbook. It's understanding what's been paid and what you have received money for, which is really conceptually really simple. But when you start digging into all of the bits that it needs to do in order to carry out that simple task, it gets more complicated. So it integrates with things like finance systems to be able to update ledgers. It integrates with revs and bends to make sure that debtors are managed, housing rental payments are managed. There's a huge amount of services that people pay their councils for, and each one of those needs to be able to talk to the income management system, say, I'm expecting this to be paid, and to be told this has been paid so it doesn't get asked for again. In addition to that, we found when digging into these things that commonly, very commonly, the method of payment is also tightly coupled with the income management system. So particularly now that with an awful lot of payments are taken electronically, now they're taken online, then that process of taking the money for a thing is commonly the responsibility of the income management system. So while it's really simple, it's also quite complicated, and that's one of the things that we've been struggling with a bit about how to represent it in both of those ways. During the discovery and in the research we've been doing during the alpha as well, the digging into this problem, we think we've identified a number of problems with your IMS, with IMSs in general. The first one is that they're expensive. You're probably paying between £10,000 and £50,000 for the license and support of your IMS. That's quite a lot of money for a simple thing. And that's just making sure the software still runs. So on top of that, you're probably also being asked for money for upgrades. So when there's a new version or a feature that needs to be done, a regulatory change, you're probably being asked for some extra money. You're probably being asked for that money to upgrade the thing just so that your company will carry on supporting it, that they can't support old software. So you can't carry on running on version 2 when the current version is version 5. You've also got to pay your staff time for managing those upgrades. So those upgrades are onerous tasks. That means to say that you need to do a whole bunch of testing, and you need to align people to that testing. You need to have systems down for a while, so you've got to warn everybody that they can't take payments during that time, or those kind of things happen, and that takes quite a lot of change management and quite a lot of time and energy of your staff. You may be changing other systems, and you may want configuration changes. You'll be asked to pay for those as well. And quite a lot of the time, you're responsible for running the servers. So you've probably bought the servers, you've installed them in your data center, maybe in the basement of your building, or maybe you're running them in your cloud environment, but you're paying for those servers. And when those servers need updating, you're responsible for updating the servers as well. Maybe that means to say you've got to monitor them, you've got to upgrade their operating systems, you've got to put more memory in them, or whatever it is when they start running slowly. And quite frequently your software provider will blame the fact that the servers aren't updated on poor performance. So those are the kind of things that make up the cost of running an IMS, and it adds up to quite a lot. Changing between IMSs, so you might have a 2 or a 5 year contract for your IMS. You get to the end of it and you work out how much it's going to cost you to change to a different IMS, and you suddenly realize that there are all these integrations with these different systems, and therefore you're going to have to spend a lot of time thinking or reintegrating if you change IMS. So quite a lot of the time you're just going to say it's not worth it, we'll just stick with the one we've got because we won't have to change all the other things then. So changing between providers is a hard task. often the IMS itself is that close coupling between the IMS and the means in which you can take money, particularly on credit and debit cards, are closely linked. This has an issue in that you can't see what the real cost of the whole IMS is. You've got a whole bunch of per transaction costs. You've got a whole bunch of license costs, which are yearly or over a contract period, and support costs mixed in with all of those change costs and your staff time costs. You really don't have a very clear picture of exactly how much it's costing to run your income management system. One of the problems we notice is there isn't a lot of choice. So there are two dominant suppliers. There used to be three. The third sold its IMS to one of the two dominant ones, consolidating the market further. That means to say that if you're going to change, you're going to change probably to the other one. You're probably running one of them, you're probably going to change to the other one. That lack of choice means to say that you have even less incentive to change, because they're pretty much the same. They don't really do anything different from each other, and the service you get from them is pretty much the same. One of the problems is that because there's only two of them, that service isn't very good. Each of those suppliers knows that you don't have very much choice, so they've got no real incentive to make sure that this system is keeping up to date, or it's cost effective, or it's meeting your needs. So they've really got you by the short and curlies, and it's going to take a great deal of will on your part to change. So that's the problems that we saw. We saw those during the discovery and since in our during that process. During the alpha, we've also done that. That's not really the proposition. We kind of want to talk about what the proposition is and what it does and why you should have it. So first of all, talk about the benefits. Why should you change? The lower total cost of ownership is a key driver for wanting to offer a different IMS. And it's not necessarily just the cost of the software, it's about that total cost of everything, all of the things that are bundled into running an IMS. But we also recognise that the current market quite often charges different councils an amount of money for the same thing, for the same configuration. And we wanted to try and create a shared code base, a shared set of configurations, so that all councils can start sharing costs and therefore reducing those costs. We want to separate out the card payment, the chip and pin type payment system from the IMS, so you can clearly change your card provider to the most efficient when you want to, perhaps without changing your IMS. It means to say that you've got a more open market, and perhaps you'll get better rates. We wanted to remove hidden costs, so we want to be very clear about what it is you're paying for, so that you can make judgments on whether it's worth it or not. We want to make sure that the product that you're using carries on being developed and meeting your requirements, whether they are user requirements, user needs, or changes to the way you do things, or whether they are driven by regulatory change. One of the things that we heard quite a lot in the discovery was that there was a desire for an IMS which was honed to the needs of councils. That you recognise that you have some very different needs. All of those different services that you sell place needs on you to be able to manage them well. You also have a whole bunch of standards to meet that perhaps other people in other organisations, other types of organisations don't. So something which is designed specifically for councils it would be advantageous. I'll extend that actually to include housing associations, who are often very closely related to councils but may not be. I mentioned that because I think we've got one in the room today. So moving on from those benefits, we'll maybe talk about the features that might deliver those benefits. are kind of high level. So these are the things that you would see on the side of the box when buying a product. The first is modern, easy to use interfaces. So that mobile ready and accessible thing. Accessibility is a requirement. It's a regulatory one. Mobile ready is something which can lead to transformations in the way that you do things. So we have heard that current suppliers are holding back the use of upgrade of browsers within councils because they don't work with modern browsers, which seems to be something which would extremely frustrating for the councils who mentioned it. The automated matching and allocation. So when the IMS tries to match a payment with a line in a bank statement, that doing as much as that in an automatic way as possible means to say that you could start making savings on your on the team that has to run the IMS, and you can get your finance team doing higher value tasks. The ability to configure that yourself, that you haven't got extended development cycles and times for doing simple things like recognizing that Mrs. Smith has put the wrong reference number on the back of her check again. That kind of thing can be done very quickly by a finance team, but also the configuration of new integrations as well. So recognizing that we may want to change a line of business system, another system which feeds in and integrates with the IMS, and being able to do that quickly, potentially without recourse to a supplier, would be really good. One of the features which was mentioned in a session in Discovery, which I put on here because of the reaction it got when discussed in a Discovery session, was automated returns. So when you get failures of payment, being able to do those automatically was seen as saving days per month. So it's mentioned here. The provision of an API is something which is a feature of this IMS, but not everybody can use APIs. So APIs are a really good way to integrate, and it's the way that we should be designing our systems so that they can talk to each other. But recognizing that many of your existing systems are probably going to integrate via file exchanges, passing CSV files around or Excel files is a common way to do it. So being able to do both of those things is an important feature that we've included. Pause, but carry on. There's a couple of things that we recognize that we are proposing our features of the new IMS. One is close coupling of, or close integration with, rather than close coupling, of automated telephone payments. The ability to take payments automatically by people who don't want to go online is something which is seen as a great cost saving in your customer service centres, in your customer contact centres. We are proposing working with GovUK Pay in helping them define and provide an automatic telephone payment mechanism to complement their card processing, their existing online card payment processing gateway. We've had numerous conversations with them. I know Miriam's on the call as well. I spotted that. Hello, Miriam. And we are trying to hone in on how that will be provided, what features it will provide, and how it will work. Certainly, we're expecting that when we define it, it will mean to say that there's no PCI DSS issues, because it will all be provided by an external supplier who already have PCI DSS for their online payments, but also we'll have that flexibility of being able to work with the GovUK Pay provider, PSP, Stripe, or with their mechanisms for providing your own credit card merchant account processes, etc. So we've included in here, you'll get this slide deck after we finished, the kind of experience that might allow. That of an example one is getting a parking fine, a PCM. That in those cases, somebody will get a telephone number which won't go to the council's contact centre. It will go directly to a payment process hosted by GovUK Pay, which will allow them to take the money and the reference number. That reference number will then be collected by the IMS and matched against the PCN record from the PCN system when that synchronizes. That can then automatically be then added to the ledger, so you know where that money is coming from. The kind of conversion rates that we've seen from numbers from Barnsley Council is that on certain processes like PCNs, that 98% of people go through the automated process rather than want to speak to somebody about their PCN, which is incredibly encouraging, because that's a large number of calls that no longer need to be answered. Chip and pin payments was another area of great interest. As I mentioned earlier, that's normally closely coupled with the IMS. If you buy an IMS from one of the existing suppliers, you'll normally also buy their chip and pin devices. In our case, we are talking about unbundling this, so you bring your own. Now that has a few advantages, that you're able to use some of the newer consumer, or they're not really consumer, but they're certainly easier entry-level devices from the marketplace that has grown up from taking card payments now. So I'm sure you've all been to coffee shops sometime in the distant past and paid waiting staff for your coffee using something which is based on a mobile phone or an iPad, linked to a very small device which allows you to do contactless and chip and pin payments. Those systems are modern systems that provide APIs so that you can get that information directly into your IMS very, very quickly. We are not suggesting that we are providing that service. We are saying that if you choose one of those services, that there will be integration points with the IMS for it. There are a couple of really interesting use cases that we've seen for that, and we've included, I won't go through every stage of these, but we've got a couple of user stories here, journeys. The first is about a resident going to a contact centre, walking into a contact centre, and wanting to pay for something on their account. So they may have a rental account, or a council tax account, and want to pay some money off of it. So the process of capturing that customer, capturing and confirming that customer reference number is the important one there, to then being able to resolve the payment that you get into your bank against that customer account. So again, the IMS will provide the mechanism for capturing that information. The other one is about doing that in instances where you may be mobile. So this is a user journey for a market inspector taking payment for a market pitch. So they may be wandering around the market saying, I need you to pay your pitch fees today, please, and taking the money on chip and pin. Where this may normally at the moment this may be an anonymous payment, so it's just the market inspector taking a bunch of payments, adding them up at the end of the day and saying I've got this much money. But the integration of a mobile interface for logging which pitches have been sold which days is an instance where modern technology and using an unbundled chip and pin mechanism means to say you could gather more information and more intelligence. And I'm sure there are other services that you can think of within your own councils where that may make a difference to your business intelligence and what you do. Right, I'm sure I'm going way over, so I may need to speed up a little bit. So the next question is, if these features are things that you like the sound of, how do you get hold of it? We've come up with a model for different ways in which we expect councils may want to adopt it. 4 different levels of adoption. The first is just using an open source software. So if you have a development team who are familiar with the technologies, they would be able to download and stand up the software themselves without paying anything. I'll get onto pricing in a minute, but as open source software, they would be able to run that software themselves. Many councils don't have development teams. They may have IT teams who could take a piece of software and follow instructions in order to put it on a server and keep it running and make sure that the databases stand up and stay stable, but probably wouldn't want to tinker with code. That's where the software subscription model comes in, that there would be a payment to maintain that code and keep developing that code and to provide a council's IT team with support to help them deploy it and resolve any issues that they have with it. The next level up would be when we expect to provide a hosted and managed software as a service version of it, where a finance team would be able to provide payment details to the to pay for the service and then be completely supported. So they wouldn't need recourse to their own IT team if they didn't want to. They certainly could, and there could be support for that IT team, but they could run the IMS without intervention from their own IT team because it's completely self-contained, hosted, managed externally in the cloud. We also recognise that there are times when a council may not have the facilities and the capacity to run projects, to do integrations, or to look at data, or data migrations, or onboarding, all of those kind of things. So we need to define a professional services offering as well. So that's where a council could pay a provider to run projects to integrate with the IMS to their very specific needs as well. Those professional services we are expecting only to be available for hosted and managed users, not for the software subscription. So this is keeping a wall between the providers of support and services and the council's own network. So you get the ability for professional services to deal with your data and your specific data if it is hosted, not if it's on your own servers. So that's, I probably already covered some of this stuff, the 4 different levels of support, that if you take the open source software, then you'll become a member of a community, and you can ask that community questions in order to get help, but there'd be no service level agreement in place, so you couldn't guarantee things. If you take the software subscription, you can feel assured that their new releases will be made available to you. You could influence a product roadmap, so you could say, I really need this feature. And you'd also have some IT team support, as I mentioned there, hands-off IT team support. So basically, they would tell your IT team how they might want to approach a problem and how they might want to fix it, but they probably wouldn't fix it for them. At the SaaS level, it's second-line support. So basically, any member of your finance or IT team can ask questions, and it can be something like, I've forgotten how to do this operation because I don't do it very often. Which buttons do I press? And the team would then tell them which buttons they need to press, provide them with pointers to help files, videos, etc., that show them how to use it. They wouldn't press the buttons for them because that would imply access to the data. At the professional services, that's a full service where you could say, I need this to happen. Can you make it happen, please? 4 different levels of support. Now, the reason why we're separating this is because our real objective is not to produce another piece of software and be another software provider in the marketplace, but it is to change the market. It's to allow other people to take the other organizations to take the open source software and then offer the SaaS and then offer the professional services on top of it, creating real choice in the market so that the value you get is measured against the market. So you can then swap providers at the drop of a hat. You can say, actually, this provider isn't able to provide me with the professional services I need. I'm going to move my hosting and therefore get my professional services from this other provider. And that can happen very, very quickly because it will be on the same platform. So that's the change we're hoping to engender in the market itself in order to get councils better support and better value for money. A crucial one, we think that we need to put a cost in the proposition. We don't know yet is the long answer. We do think that the open source version will be license free, so your own development team would be able to download it, deploy it, maintain it, all of those things. A software subscription would be some thousands of pounds a year, but you would obviously need to provide the hosting for that and your IT time to manage it. The SaaS version would be more thousands per year, but you wouldn't need to provide anything else, so that would be totally hosted. The professional services competitive pricing, I think, is the thing there, and again, that move towards creating a different market for those things, which ensure it's competitive, because you could go somewhere else to get those professional services. So once again, we are not trying to become another provider. We're trying to create a market, a better market for providing of this this system. The short answer is that our intention is to make sure this is less than you're paying at the moment, which is why it's important that we understand what all of the costs are, so that we can be sure that we are making total cost of ownership lower, rather than just the license fee or rather than just the transaction fee. We want to make sure that we've understood all of the costs in there, and we can present you with something which says, if you use this, your costs will go down and the quality of service will improve as well. There's a technical bit. I don't know if there's anybody technical in the room. I had to get some of our team members to help me write these ones. But you might want, if you do want those software subscription or the open source version, you might want to know what technology it's written in, so you can ensure that you've got the right skills. So it is in C# and .NET. It uses Entity Framework, which means to say it works with a number of different databases. It allows integration with Active Directory, so it can sit alongside your existing authentication mechanisms. And we are intending to provide Docker configurations so that it's really easy for you to deploy. So it doesn't mean to say you have to deploy it that way, but it might make it much easier for you to. I didn't think it was worth going into much more of the technology than that, but of course there is more detail before it. This is the simple look of the IMS. Really, really simply, it has a bunch of files that can come in. It has a bunch of files that can go out. So we have remittance files that come in, and accounts that can be paid, and references, bank statements that come in, and then we update lines of business systems based on that, and finance ledgers we update based on that, and then there's reporting and data access APIs that can access the data in it as well. So that's a really simple view. There's payment mechanisms at the top there, and down the bottom is all of the configuration, so which users are using it, and so user management and configuration of matching rules, etc. So that makes it look really, really easy. But then we have a look at another view of the conceptual one. And this is when it gets complicated. When we look at all the different things that it might talk to, all of the different integrations it needs to provide, it gets messy very quickly. So this is the one that we drew as in a co-design session for Barnsley, so just for the system that's there at the moment. So this hasn't yet had lots of things in it from other councils where we need to integrate with things that we don't know about yet, which something I think we need to address. We're looking at those integrations with systems. We're thinking about them in two different ways. First is about standard integrations. You're using a standard piece of software, a standard external system. Maybe you're using Capita Academy for revs and bends, or civil enforcement. We should know how to integrate with those, because lots of councils do it, and we can provide those as this is out of the box. You click a button and the setup is there. You tell your supplier of your revs and bends or your civil enforcement thing is, we're using the Barnsley IMS. Here's the way in which you configure your part, that line of business system to accept a configuration, and and it all works straight away. And then there's a whole bunch of custom integrations where we need to customize certain fields in files or processes, and we want to provide interfaces to to allow the customization of that by the councils themselves. We have an open question, and it's something that our prototypes are hoping to resolve for us. The complexity of defining those integrations we think is significant, and while in our discovery we saw that finance teams said yes, we wanted to be able to do this ourselves, we are not yet sure whether they will carry on saying that when they see the complexity of the interface that they might need to do it with, and whether they might just yes, that's a thing that we would just give to our IT team. That's why we're building a prototype to test that. Wow, got to the end. Fantastic. And we've got some time, which is good. I don't think I went too far over, but I did say an awful lot. We really would like questions on this. We want comments on this, and we want feedback. The point of doing this is for us to test this proposition, to find out what we've missed, what we've got wrong, what we've misunderstood. So I want to open up to questions from the floor, from the video conf now. I'm happy to have them voiced, but if it gets complicated, maybe we will ask them via the chat so that we can sort them one by one, and we don't have talking over each other. So I'm going to turn off the screen share and see if anybody's got anything to say.
There is the raise the hand feature as well in Teams, if that helps. So we don't get crossovers.
This is the point where everybody goes quiet for a moment.
Matthew has his hand up.
Matthew.
Hi guys. Thanks for the demonstration and explanation. More on the comments and feedback side than questions. I just wanted to say a lot of your points you raised as to why you're looking into this absolutely resonate with us. We've had similar conversations internally about what are we going to do. Our current system isn't meeting our requirements. Hence why we're on this meeting to see what you provide. Really like the ideas that you're bringing around GovPay and telephone payments, and open source and implementation methods are something that always excite me. So yeah, really keen to see if we can provide you any more in-depth feedback or comment on any other propositions or thoughts you have in the future. Really.
That's super to hear, Matt. That's really encouraging. And yeah, there will be after this a call for further participation, I think, is a nice way of putting it. So we will be calling out for opportunities to talk to people a bit more about what they've heard here, what they think of it, and get more into specific needs of specific councils. I put a slide up. Tony prodded me to tell me that I was still screen sharing, which was good because I wanted to say maybe you need some prompts to think about what your comments could be. So I put a bunch of questions on the screen. It'd be lovely to hear your answers to these, but please do ask anything you want.
And Mike has his hand up. Mike.
Hey guys, it looks like it's the rugby show at the moment. I'm not intending to do this. Matt and I were having a cheeky little conversation to the side while this was going on, and just I'll reflect all of Matt's comments that I've just said to Matt, if me and you sat down and we had the time and we were going to build this, you've just told us what we would have built, and we'd have come to that decision sort of at the end of our conversation. So he's hugely resonating with us. I suppose taking it to sort of, this might well be on your roadmap. The thing that stands out to me is you've asked the questions, what integrations are important to you. What I'd really like to see is us to be able to build our own integrations, and actually there be a layout for us to be able to take any system, integrate into it, and then release back to the open source community. We're about to go on to, well, am I allowed to say where we're about to go to, Matt? I think we are, aren't we? He's staying quiet.
I would wait till we're signed.
Okay, so we're about to go to a new system which has got open source elements, because our philosophy is that we desperately want to share back to other LAs as well, and actually when we come up with the solutions, to not just to be able to hand over sort of process elements of that, but actually be able to hand code etc. back and go, this is how we fixed it. Take our code and use it, or take our code and modify it. So I suppose if it's not in the roadmap, what I'd like to see on the roadmap is a developer's handbook for doing our own integrations and then handing them back to you guys for you to release to the rest of the community.
That's really encouraging to hear. It does pose some questions for us. Is that, the first council that pops up and says, yes, we really want to do this, talks about code, and what I would like to get to the bottom of is whether that means to say that you need to run your own, or whether those integrations can be done via either APIs that can sit outside the code base. Preferably
API. What we're trying to do is I mean, what it's like. You try and get all your systems as modern as possible, and one of the things that we've built into our digital strategy is that everything is open API, etc., REST API. Not everything is going to be, because that's the nature of the beast, but I suppose in answer to your question, if at all possible, then yes, absolutely, it would be. If we're using it, if we're the first guys to use, I don't know, Braintree or some weird system which does use APIs, then we can build it in and then hand that code over and go, there you go, there's a template.
Yes, and I think building communities, communities of councils who want to share this kind of stuff, and also specific ones who want to share integrations, I think is somewhere in a roadmap that's not written down yet. I think it's always assumed that the building communities is an important part of this, and building open communities as well. So we know that suppliers do talk about communities, but quite often they're closed communities that you have to be paying some money to somebody in order to be able to contribute. And what we wanted to do was create more open communities where it's easier to contribute. But there is a thing about how is code shared, where does it get shared? These are the details that probably need to be worked out at some point. But also the ability to share configurations of file exchanges as well as code that talks to APIs.
There's a very much a linked debate on this around standards and API standards. So if every IMS had an API that looked the same, sharing becomes incredibly easy. But if every IMS has an API that looks incredibly different, sharing becomes very hard. So there is a question that we're actively sort of thinking about, is the whole ecology and the ecosystem of the IMS landscape and these integrations, and what can we do to mean that things can be reused even if you're potentially using a different IMS, but it has the same fundamental building blocks in its APIs. Do you want to ask an actual question, Gavin, or are you just happy for it to be in chat?
Hello. No, I thought I'd put it in chat so as to not interrupt the flow of the last conversation, and so I didn't forget it. But yeah, no, my question really is about, I'm interested in how you see that transition from the current state where you've got all the expert knowledge is in the Barnsley team, and you're talking about wanting to build a market, as it were, and different providers might be stepping into that. But obviously you've got a code base and a set of knowledge around what was built that's not immediately accessible. So what are your thoughts around how that's going to be available, and are the Barnsley team actually going to be part of that open source subscription layer, for instance, so that can form part of it?
I think this will be very much informed by the meeting that we have booked in on Monday.
Yeah.
So our task was to make sure we are engaging with other suppliers, to be able to find out what other suppliers need in order to be able to start creating an active marketplace. So I think that's one of them. I think there's an obvious thing, which is that Barnsley currently uses their IMS. It's live. It's used by them and their the Housing Association, which is a separate entity but owned by the council. So it's in use. So they're going to carry on developing it, whether anybody else does or not, because that's what they're committed to. So they will be a member of the open source community, even if nobody else is, and therefore that expertise will be available. But I think it's just going to be interesting on how other suppliers and support providers will interact in that community, or perhaps interact at the subscription level, where they are contributing to the cost of a core team. Or whether there is a supplier who wants to take on ownership of that core team and take on the ownership of and the commitment to open sourcing the code base itself. Barnsley doesn't want to be a software provider. It just finds itself in that position.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, so there are no more hands up at the minute. I'm conscious of time. It's 10 to 1. I'll steal the screen, Saul.
Yep. And
just move us on to next steps, if that's all right. Get your face out the corner there. So where are we? So next sprint 3 for us, will be progressing the prototypes into actual accessible, clickable. We've got to agree, I guess, the level of fidelity, but actual prototypes that we can work through. And the idea is for the 4 missing features in the system right now, we'll have some screens that can be flowed through, and we can test those with people, along with wider journey maps, so that we can see how those play out through the whole usability of the system. We're going to continue in the design, the first iteration of the support model and proposition. So from the questions that we've had today, and more feedback we'll get as we're going through this sprint, we will build that out, put more detail into it. And then one of the big focuses for next time is defining the approach to service governance as well. So a lot of the questions you've asked there around shared code libraries and sharing of knowledge, I think, fit into that element. So we'll be starting to drive those pieces out as well. So that's it from us. That URL that I'm sharing there isn't technically live yet. I'm just waiting for the DNS to propagate. The site is there, but it's pointing at a holding page at the minute. So once that propagates, you'll be able to hit that. On there, we will share the slide deck that we've just been through, and also a feedback survey. So if you haven't had a chance to ask a question right now, there'll be a survey that we'll share at the end, and I'll email that out to all the attendees as well. So that it just gives you a chance to send us any feedback you've got afterwards. And then I think, if I just jump over here, that is it from us.